Randy Drake Associates.
Okay, I think we're ready to get started. Sorry for the delay here, I'm busy yakking away. My name is Caitlin, and I am the Stewardship Coordinator with Prairie Conservation Action Plan, or PCAP. It's a bit of a mouthful, so I usually just say PCAP. My colleague Diego here is the manager with PCAP, and we partnered with South of the Divide Conservation Action Program, another mouthful, so we say SODCAP, and that's my colleague Krista over there. So we're bringing you this workshop about multi-species management, and we've just kind of found out that people get lots of information about tons of different species and the best management practices, things you should do for this bird and that bird, and a lot of it is kind of overwhelming and sometimes conflicting. So we're hoping to have a few presentations today about how to manage for multiple species on your land. And we're going to finish the day with a hands-on ranch exercise, so I'm pretty excited about that. First up, we have Multi-SAR, so that's Alberta Conservation Association and Alberta Prairie Conservation Forum. We'll have a presentation by Grasslands National Park and their management plan there. We'll have a break shortly after those two presentations where we'll have some coffee and snacks and stuff. And then we'll have a presentation by SODCAP by a producer, Orin Bayless, and kind of his perspective of managing for multiple species. And then we'll finish up with the ranch planning exercise about 5:30 or so. And Nature Saskatchewan is having their famous Conservation Awareness Supper. So you're all welcome for that. And I think everyone's pre-registered with Becky already. So yeah, we've got a great day planned. Just a couple of notes. Financial support for today's presentation is provided by Environment and Climate Change Canada. We have some resources over here that you're welcome to help yourself to. If any time you need coffee to stay awake for the presentations, go for it, and the washrooms are just over there. And I'd like to introduce our first presenters, which is Catherine Taylor from Alberta Prairie Conservation Forum and Brad Downey from the Alberta Conservation Association, and they'll be talking about the Multi-Species at Risk program in Alberta. So Catherine Taylor grew up in Lethbridge, and during her childhood was able to experience the many different landscapes of southern Alberta firsthand. This sparked her interest in ecology, and later she went on to attain her master's degree by looking at how different grazing practices affected riparian songbirds. This work tied her into the prairie conservation community in Alberta, and she's been involved in the conservation of Alberta's prairie landscapes ever since. She currently works as a coordinator for both the Prairie Conservation Forum and Multi-SAR. And Brad Downey grew up in rural southwest Manitoba before moving to Lethbridge, Alberta to attend college. He currently lives in Lethbridge with his wife Brandy and their sons Coulter and Ryder. Brad has been working with the Alberta Conservation Association on species at risk for the past 17 years in southern Alberta, focusing on the Milk River and the South Saskatchewan watersheds. And his primary program is the Grassroots Multi-SAR Stewardship Program that works collaboratively and voluntarily with landowners to maintain and enhance wildlife habitat for species at risk, while also benefiting their cattle operations. So with that, I'd like to call up Brad and Catherine. I might give you a flicker. You just give me that.
Well, thank you for inviting us to come talk to you today. As Caitlin mentioned, I'm Brad Downey. Basically, we wanted to come talk to you today about this Multi-SAR program that we've been involved with for the last 17 years in Alberta. This Multi-SAR program started as a partnership between Alberta Conservation Association and the Government of Alberta. And the reason for that was there was a desire from producers to look at their ranches with a multi-species approach. They were tired of multiple groups coming and knocking on the door, wanting to work for sharp-tailed grouse. 2 weeks later, they want to go work with burnt owls. 2 weeks later, it's leopard frogs. So why can't we just all talk and collaborate and work together on one program, one project, and look at all these species at once? This partnership was made possible thanks to long-term funding from Environment Canada. So we've had partnership with our funding from them for the last 17 years. Over the next few years, we worked with our early adopters, so the producers that first signed up, and they helped guide our program. That's what we refer to as a grassroots program. They helped guide what some of the information was put into these projects or into the plans, even right down to the habitat enhancement agreements we use was actually developed through working with those early adopters. So about 5 years later, in about 2007, I guess, so we started in 2002, so about 2007 the Prairie Conservation Forum came on, and we continue to work in our core area, the Milk River watershed in southeast Alberta. And then in about 2015, we were very fortunate that we received funding from the Canadian Cattlemen's Association, who got funding from the SARPEL initiative, the Species at Risk Partnerships on Agricultural Land funds. This allowed us to expand out into a larger area, the South Saskatchewan watershed of Alberta, and I'll show you a map later on here. With that partnership came groups like Cows and Fish that some people may be aware of. They do the riparian assessments for us, along with the Canadian Roundtable for Sustainable Beef. We're one of their sustainability projects through that program, as well as the Alberta beef producers. And so all those three cattle groups, they sit on our advisory board, and we meet with them once, maybe twice a year, and go through our programming and any direction they think we should take. So we're very fortunate with this partnership. We've been able to collaborate with producers on species at risk stuff for about 600,000 acres of land right now in Alberta. So what is Multistar? It's a voluntary grassroots conservation project, and you can keep flicking. It aims at influencing land management decisions, creating habitat improvements, assisting with their implementation, and we do all this because we want to help in the sustainability of the rangelands, but also not only benefit wildlife, but also provide benefits to cattle operations. That's key. Multistar stands for multiple species at risk. It's multidisciplinary, so that means there's biologists, ranchers, agrologists, riparian specialists, all working together. And it's a team. You can flick it again there too. Yeah. And it's a team-based environment. So these are all the groups that have boots on the ground that are doing the surveys and working with producers. Core member of the team is the landholder, right? They're the ones that own the land. They're the ones that ultimately decide what happens on their land. We're simply there as advisors, and we go and collect the information for the teams. So, next one. Here's so basically our core area is in the Milk River, the yellow area. That's where our core group of landholders are, and are some of our biggest supporters down there that promote the program. The purplish blue area is where we've expanded out now, thanks to the Canadian Cattlemen's Association, so the program's expanded. And the orangey area is a new area that we're starting here in April 1st. Similar process of what I'm going to talk about how we collaborate and work with producers. The only difference with that one up there is actually we took out the species at risk component. It's more general wildlife. It's not focused on species at risk. So same process that I'm going to talk to you about. I just want to mention that one up there. So ultimately, we're trying to get a similar type of program across the whole province of Alberta. So you can flick it again. Yeah. So how do we go about collaborating with producers? One of the first things you need to know is you need to drink coffee. I never drank coffee when I first started. Now I drink 2 to 3 cups a day. That's very important because you need to go have kitchen table talks with producers. The first thing you do, you need to go in and you need to learn to listen and learn from those producers on the things that they've seen over the years. A lot of these families have been in the landscape for many decades. Some for over 100 years. Their families have managed these lands. And so we go in and we want to learn, listen from them. They have lots of great ideas, lots of great reasons why certain species may not occur there anymore, or things that they've tried and have worked or hasn't worked. Same time, communication is a two-way street. They ask us about species at risk. They ask us about different ideas that we may have or things we've learned from other producers. We can act as that medium to talk about what has worked or has worked with these other producers as examples. We do all that because we want to develop long-term relationships, and that's key. To be successful in any conservation program, you need to have good relationships with producers on the ground, right? Long-term relationships built on mutual trust and respect and open and honest communication. That's very important. Relationships, I'll tell a story, I guess, just to show you how important relationships are. There was a thing that came up you guys might be familiar with. It's called the Sage Grouse Protection Order. That thing came out a number of years ago. We had been working with the producer for about 5 years since then, before it came out. And it came out, and I actually called the producer up, and we started chatting like we always do. We talked to them probably 2-3 times a year. And he went off about sage grouse. He went off about it, about protection order, how he's not letting any more researchers on his land. He's going to close the whole land down. He's just upset. And I understood. I can see why. And then I sheepishly asked, well, you know, actually, it's been 5 years, and so it's you know, we were wondering if you could come back and do our reassessments, right? Because it's been 5 years, and we're hoping to go back and look at some of these sites. And he said, oh yeah, no problem, come on out. Yeah, I wasn't talking about you guys. I was talking about those damn environmental groups. And but just so that having those relationships, like people see you in a different light, like they trust you, they talk with you, they see you in a different light. He even was proudly showing us where his burn owls were and all that. It's all about relationships, right? If we had tried to go out and start working with them right after the EPO, no, it'd be like 6 years later or 5 years later, maybe they'd warm up to the idea, right? A lot of doors were slammed in their face if we had tried to do it after the fact. So having those relationships ahead of time is important. This picture I usually show up because relationships carry over to the next generations too. We have a producer we started working with back in 2004. His son was only 13 at the time. Obviously this guy's not 13, but that's my own son. But was 13 at the time, and he's now in his late 20s. He has his own family. He manages the ranch with his dad, and we have a great relationship with them. We go to help him brand as well, wrestle calves. They know our family, we know theirs, being part of the community. Again, all key things that are important when it comes to any type of conservation work, but even more so if species at risk and other activities. So, two things we often talk with producers about is the first one, that if you have species at risk on your land, you're doing something right. Keep up the good work. What are some of the things we could support you with to keep that good work up? And what are some of the other tools that you may need to continue to maintain and enhance that habitat, right? So you can go back to that one again. Yeah. The other
Sorry.
no, that's right. The other thing we want to recognize is that we are only out there for 3 weeks out of the year doing our surveys, doing our baseline assessments, right? Producers are out there for 365 days a year protecting and managing the land, right? That's very important. That's why we still have species at risk. And if you flick the next one, that's why species at risk still have a place to come home to. That's very important, right? So I always say when we present this is, you know, if you know a landholder, thank them for all the work they do, and thank them for actually allowing you to have a job to go work on species at risk. It's important to know. So.
Sorry.
No, it's fine. So habitat. So what do we actually provide producers then, except go drink their coffee? We actually go and we provide them with baseline assessment. So it's a snapshot in time of where their operation currently is. A lot of producers are quite interested in this. You know, obviously they like to have a baseline about 10 years ago, so it's never too late to have a baseline to see where you're starting. Our baseline assessments, if you want to flick through a few, baseline inventory for wildlife, range, and riparian, so they get all that information. We do an assessment on the health of the rangeland and the riparian area. So for a lot of producers, this is the first time they may actually see their ranch laid out in this aspect, right? So they actually have their whole ranch laid out in the health of the different plant communities and polygons on the property. We provide general and pasture-specific management recommendations. When I say we, I mean the team we, right? That's the rancher, that's the biologist, the growologist, the riparian specialist. We sit down as a team, we talk about the inventories and discuss different ideas that producers may be interested in doing, right? They still decide what goes on. We have habitat improvements, so we actually provide funding for habitat improvements. That ranges from paying for a portable watering system, recognizing that portable watering systems have maintenance costs, so we pay for the whole thing up front. Also fencing projects, and we do cost shares. Usually we pay for 70% of the cost on things like solar panels and troughs and stuff like that. Recommendations to mitigate industrial development, the reports that the producers get. we'll have a section on any of the important habitats that are on their property, right? So any nesting sites or lek sites, they show the setback distances that most industrial activity has to abide by. We've had producers in the past that have actually used that to guide oil, gas lines across some of their private land. Now, they still have to do their own surveys too, right? But at least it helps guide these pipelines across some of the sensitive areas. So they've been used in that manner as well. And the last one, oh sorry, go back there. So the last one is monitoring and evaluation. You can't have a baseline if you're not going to go back and actually evaluate and see how things change, right? So if we do an enhancement, we try to go back once every year or once every 2 years, depending on the type of enhancement that was done. And if it's the whole property, we'll go back and do a sub-sample of that original baseline assessment every 5 years. So we'll go back and see how things have changed. And that's basically because a lot of the ranchers we work with, they operate in about a five-year window. You know, where can I see the operation in 5 years? And so we'll go back and reassess and see how things have changed in that time. So I think Catherine's going to talk a bit more now about some of the actual surveys we do.
Yeah, so what we actually do when we get out onto the ground and onto the properties. So this is basically, we do this mapping before we go out in the field. The circles are bird survey, mostly bird survey, but they're really wildlife. So anything that we see or hear within these plots we'll record. When we're plotting these on the map, we use something that we have in Alberta called the Grassland Vegetation Inventory, and basically it's a biophysical inventory of the entire grassland region of Alberta, and it's based on soils, it's based on anthropogenic features, it's based on vegetation, so percent cover of herbaceous, shrub, tree cover, bare ground, all that sort of stuff goes into that, and they do that. They basically started doing GBI in 2006, finished the entire grassland area a couple years ago, so the entire thing is done. And basically we go in and there's polygons. This one's actually a really simple idea of what they are, but these black lines kind of delineate where polygons are. And basically, when they were doing GBI, they kind of use these images and can draw lines based on the different community types. And so we like to make sure that we have enough of these survey plots within the GBI polygons. And then we'll do our vegetation surveys in the same areas. So these are 100 to 200 meters, depending on the sizes of the GBI polygons. And basically, for wildlife, get up bright and early, go out there, and you time 5-minute time period, and you record everything you see and hear wildlife-wise, and mostly it ends up being songbirds, of course. So everything that you get, you record. And then after that, you might do other things like do some burrowing owl playbacks if you're in burrowing owl habitat, for instance. And so walking between these points, even if you see something different, you'll record it as well. So that's basically how the wildlife surveys work. This is just an example of some nice habitat. We wouldn't actually put those bird plots kind of on the edge of coulees like that, but some of the areas that we do work where this would be good habitat for species like short-horned lizards.
I don't get the flat area, I get that area I have to hike into.
Yeah, you definitely have to hike there. So, as well as doing the point count surveys, we also do targeted surveys for a bunch of different species at risk. So this, of course, is a short-horned lizard. So these guys will go look for usually in August. And you can tell where they're, well, first of all, you've been out on the property already, so you know if the habitat looks kind of like what they would like. And then also the GBI will help, because it kind of gives you soils information, and you'll know where the badland areas and stuff like that is. So then you go and you look for these little guys, and they're pretty hard to find. You need a good-sized team with sticks trying to find these guys, see them moving. Go on. Amphibian surveys as well. We sometimes go out and do actual amphibian surveys, but definitely when there's wetlands and stuff, we go and we look for egg masses and whether you see the actual amphibians in there. This particular one, this egg mass was actually taken from a producer's land and moved to McGrath, which is a small town in Alberta, and they started a whole new population of northern leopard frogs there with that, so the producer had direct influence on helping their species at risk spread out, I guess. Other ones we do, sharp-tailed grouse lek surveys, we do in early spring. Snake hibernacula surveys, so we do those at the end of September, early October, so we'll walk the south-facing slopes usually looking for, that's their overwintering ground, so you find a pile of snakes in a certain area and that's their hibernacula, so we look for those. We've been doing a lot more work with bats, so we've been putting out bat detectors, and then we just leave them out for a certain amount of time, and then you know what kind of bats are in the area. This, of course, is our raptor surveys, so we'll go back riparian areas, cliff faces, and we're basically looking for nests and what's happening. This ferruginous hawk. We also have big nest holes all over ferruginous hawk habitat, and we'll go back and check and see if those are successful or not, if there are hawks breeding and producing young on them, and how well they do each year. Okay, so that's kind of the wildlife portion of it, and then we also do obviously the range portion of it. So what we're looking for, we do pretty detailed vegetation inventories, which is laying down like a 50-meter tape and actually looking at what all the different plants are on the ground. We also do the health assessments of the range. And so when we do those, we're looking for everything from noxious weeds to plant community structure, the litter, so if there's lots of litter or not, depending on how much moisture the ground can hold, whether there's bare ground or erosion taking place. And that all feeds into our health assessments. And it produces these types of maps that we give to landowners. So this is an example of a property. This is 1-4. And basically we break them down into 5 health categories when we're doing range health assessments. So the dark green and the light green, it's high healthy and healthy. And that means that all the proper functions of the land is being performed. The yellow is high healthy with problems, so it's still pretty good, but there are some things that are starting to get degraded a little bit. Orange is low healthy with problems, so that's kind of your early warning sign that things are starting to go a little bit downhill. And then the red is unhealthy, so the red is like your warning sign that a lot of functions are not being performed on this property. But I guess what's important to say is that this actually to us looks pretty good. So it doesn't matter that you have red on there, it doesn't matter that you have orange. We like to see kind of that heterogeneous landscape, so there's different species that like all these different things. So there's some species that will do well on the red, there's some species that will do well on the dark green. So we like to see it kind of balanced. I mean, you don't want to have the red overpowering this by any means, but a nice kind of balance of all the different health categories is actually good for the wildlife. Okay, we also have riparian health inventories done, and Cows and Fish does this in Alberta. We hire them to do these for us. And they do these polygons, so these are all different polygons that Cows and Fish might do. So some are wetlands and some are river systems. And basically when they go out there, they're looking at the health of the river system or the wetland or whatever. So they're looking at bank stability, whether there's erosion, incisement, whether there's woody plants present or not that help hold the bank together. What kind of plants are there? Of course, noxious weeds being a really bad one as well. And then they also will rate them into 3 different health categories. So they have the healthy, healthy with problems, and unhealthy. So that gives us a good idea of what's happening in the riparian areas. And then after we've collected all of our data, which takes all summer really because the range crew is out all summer, we sit down with the landowners We get together with them and we share all the information with them. And then we share those maps with them as well. And then together, because the landowner is an integral part of the team, we kind of come up with ideas together on what maybe we can do to make things better, if things need to be better, or what we can do to help the landowner out to maintain or even improve their wildlife habitat. So it's voluntary. All the recommendations are stuff these guys want to do or will think about doing in the future. So it will go into our report, if you can go to the next slide. These reports that we produce, it's got all the data in it, it's got lots of maps. We map out where all the wildlife is. We provide them with the range health maps and the riparian health maps. And then we put in the recommendations, and the recommendations, of course, we have all agreed on together. So it's a process that we all work on together, and then they get that, and it's a 5-year plan, and then we go back in 5 years and we reassess the property. And so I guess I'll turn it back to Brad, and he'll talk about some of the projects that have been done on some of the properties.
So these are some of the projects that the producers, have decided to implement, right? So we provided the report, they have it in their back pocket. Well, it won't fit, but it's good stuff. Anyways, but they have the report and they decide ultimately what they would like to implement, right? It's a tool for their management that they can use how they wish. Some of the products, or some of the enhancements that they have decided to implement include things like upland watering sites. So this particular site was a 400-foot deep well that was drilled. The water came up to about 60 feet from the surface, and it was a good flowing well. Producer always wanted to get something like that up there. Economics, though, no, it's not. But with partnering and collaborating on those projects, it made economic sense to get something like that up there. So they have two 16-foot long troughs. The water pumps up into a 3-day storage container, and then gravity feeds to those troughs down below. So really good system. He's quite happy. Pulls cattle off some of the riparian areas for about probably a mile of riparian area now. And they're stuck up on top, or they have water up on top anyways. There's no fencing, right? We don't have fencing on the riparian area, nothing. It's just an alternative watering site for the cattle to get up there and graze up in that area. And if you flick the next, and hopefully then reduce some of the pressure down on some of these riparian areas. This isn't the exact riparian area, I didn't have that, so this is a picture of riparian area. But actually reduce pressure on riparian areas. So in this case, it would reduce pressure on things like leopard frogs, loggerhead shrikes, and the cattle would be up on top grazing, and probably obviously having a little more impact on top around the watering site, but at the same time potentially providing some potential areas for burrowing owls, maybe McCown's longspurs, chestnut-collared longspurs, depending on how far out you're from those watering sites, right? You see the difference in structure and stuff. So we have producers that really, there's a number of producers like these portable watering systems. So we've used them in a few places. Some of them simply use them to attract cattle just away from important leopard frog habitat or riparian areas. And that might mean there's some that have fenced off areas. That's their decision, right? There's some that just use them to pull them off the riparian area, focusing the cattle in using those troughs and drinking from those troughs versus right on the riparian area. So, if you want to flick through the next step, yeah, that's good. We have producers. So as it gets drier, water is always one of the main enhancements that producers are interested in, right? You always say you could have lots of grass, but you have no water, then it's hard to use that grass. So water continues to be a main thing, and as it gets drier, we've had producers that get more and more concerned about wetlands and water bodies that used to have lots of water, but are drying up, and their cattle are now going further and further in. And we have producers that have lost 4 cows this past year, just going in, trying to get to the water and getting further in, and getting stuck. Some producers, again, have decided to fence it off. Some have used other watering sites. This is an example of another wetland. There's no fence line around this particular wetland. There's just multiple other watering sites put around and used by cattle. So a lot of producers, they like to see something like this. Just protect some of their water quality, and it also supports species like leopard frogs and spadefoot toads. And then, yes, spade-foot toads probably still find them in there too. They don't mind those more temperate wetlands. But I just find that that seems to be more and more, probably 80% of our projects are related to water, right? Whether we're on the east slopes or all the way through to the Saskatchewan border in Alberta, it always comes down to water. So here's an example of a producer. He's decided. Again, we don't force people to do anything. These are recommendations. So they decided then that they actually want to fence off this larger. It was a larger wetland, and they have a wetland and a dugout complex, I guess. And they provided a trough for watering on the side. They have a post that goes down into the watering trough, and it has all sorts of cuts all the way down in it. And that's for birds or bats or other species to actually cling onto and crawl out. So we often find some dead birds or other species in these troughs at times if they don't have a means to escape. So that's a very simple way to provide a ramp, I guess, or a way to escape those troughs. Next one. We have producers that, again, this is a good example. He's put a watering site up on top, a couple of troughs, solar panels. We got a call from him. He was so happy. This was the first time in 30 years that his cows were not in the riparian area at this time. They're actually further up on the slopes grazing. Very excited, and that's important for us too because those riparian area, that particular one, had bull trout and cutthroat trout in that waterway. Now he still uses that riparian area, right? He still can graze, just at different timing, right? But he was very happy, very excited to get this kind of system up on top and get his cattle up there grazing. So. Other things we've often seen, we've gone out, toured properties with producers, and we've seen a number of sites where the cattle are getting to springs, right? And so they've mucked up some of the spring area and all that, and the producers aren't happy, right? Because I mean, that's important for their water source. And so a number of them have started to, they're fencing off a bunch of these low areas, these spring areas, and then collecting the water, and then the water will flow down into a hose to a tire trough down below, gravity fed, and circulate, and then have an outflow tube that goes back into the riparian area. So that provides cleaner, better water quality, cleaner water for the cattle to drink of from the trough, and then the water goes back, and that water quality, ideally going into the riparian area, is probably better. And also what we're hoping is cooler, right, versus black.